Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. Tonight we're having a study session this evening on Goal 3, Growth for Every Student, elimination of outcome and achievement gaps. We have a big group of talent here from the North Shore School District. And Dr. Reed, would you like to lead us?
Thank you, President Swain. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce the team who is going to present Goal 3. And it's one of our 5 strategic goals. And I'm going to introduce Assistant Superintendent David Wellington as he's heading up the team that's presenting this evening. And David, if you could make sure you and the team introduce yourselves and take the screen, please.
Perfect, thank you. David Wellington, Assistant Superintendent for the West Region. I'm not sure, maybe I can introduce them as I go through the introduction of what we're talking about. Might be easier rather than trying to call people out and introduce you before you've introduced yourself. Will that work?
That works fine, thank you, David.
Okay. So does it need to be my screen? Do I share my screen now, or does Ms. Frazier do that?
I believe you can share the screen.
Okay.
But we have had some technical difficulties today, so.
All right. Are you all able to see that?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. That is a great start. Let's see if we can keep it on that technological footing, and I can even advance the slides. All right. So tonight we're going to be talking about Goal 3, Growth for Every Student, elimination of outcome and opportunity gaps. I first want to acknowledge that it's been a long day for many of you. I appreciate the work you've done today since early this afternoon. I hope you'll find that this presentation will be invigorating and engaging. Please feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentation, or we'll have time afterwards as well. So I always like to start with this slide, as you know, with a graduate. This is from our SAS graduation last year. And with this quote, "We must not see any person as an abstraction. Instead, we must see in every person a universe with its own secrets, with its own treasures, with its own source of anguish, and with some measure of triumph." And this quote, of course, as I've said before, is important to me. We're going to be looking at the 30,000-foot view. We're going to be looking at all of our students in the aggregate, 23,000. And it's really important that as we do, that we recognize that each of those bar graphs not only represents a group of students, but it also represents individual students, and keeping that front and center, as I know you all do every day, will be important to continue as we look at the big picture today. This is Goal 3, Growth for Every Student. The measures are there on the screen. I won't read those to you, and I know that by now, I believe in year 5, you've committed them all to memory. We're going to be going down the list, looking at each one of them in this particular way. We're going to look at the academic results. We're going to look at reading and math results. I'll be walking us through that. Obadiah will be talking about algebra by 8th grade. We traditionally look at that as we talk about this particular goal. Heather will be talking about world language competency and the students who have gone for their seal of biliteracy. I'll come back and talk about our advanced coursework and how we're serving students in AP, IB, college and the high school, and dual credit. Talk about the social emotional supports. Chris will be talking to us in the very beginning about equity and social justice, and then we'll talk to both Melissa Riley, Michael Tully, and Chris again, both about MTSS, RTI, and the work that we're doing now and moving forward, as well as equity and social justice and how it relates to Goal 3. So I'm going to start by, Obi reminds us every time we talk about Goal 3 that this goal is really, it certainly has some fabulous measures, but they're all about equity. Equity means each student actively engaging in rigorous standards-based curriculum, effective instruction, timely targeted enrichment and intervention, and proactive social emotional supports. So we wanted Chris to start us out with an introduction about equity and social justice and how it relates to Goal 3.
Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Bigelow, Executive Director of Educational Justice Department. So as David said, we're here to talk about Goal 3, which is part of the strategic plan for growth and every student, elimination of outcomes and opportunity gaps. And as David said, there's a whole team here. The best equation for our students' long-term success does require all of us working together towards a common goal of ensuring all of our students are successful. And we want all of our students to leave North Shore School District highly qualified to be productive and contributors to their community. So Goal 3 is about building the conditions necessary for teaching and learning through the lens of racial and educational justice. We must see the value of all forms of brilliance in our students. We also must address the importance of cultivating accessible places of belonging for each of our students, one in which they are seen, heard, valued, and supported. It's also important that we shape the schoolhouse as a place where all children thrive, where families are included and feel important, and where collaboration and community prosper. There has to be also a reciprocity between staff, families, and students, rather than one directional lines of communication, as we always talk about in our department. How are we communicating with the public, with our families, as well as our students? If we expect staff to teach through a vision of cultural competency, we must help them develop those skills and walk alongside them on their journey. The resource allocation should be equitable and intentional. Resources are what could be considered as people, time, and money. In terms of people, it's important to be intentional about who we are hiring and how we are treating the diverse staff that we already have. Hiring is important, and we've made some excellent progress. And we also see the critical importance of retaining our historical excluded staff. So we're doing some great things in that capacity and working with HR. Also data, which you will see tonight from David, but we must be intentional about what data we track and why, in order to make sure that we are measuring and prioritizing the right things. So all in all, Goal 3 is really thinking about the school district as a microcosm of society and recognizing that we have the power to influence and reimagine a school system that can be grounded in justice.
Thank you, Chris. So we're going to start by talking about the academic side. Up at the very top of each slide, you'll see the particular measure of the goal that we are looking at. As you know, in the past few years, this is where we would traditionally show the SBAC data and how our students have done year over year in terms of the SBAC testing. As you also know, this past spring, there was no SBAC testing. So showing year over year growth is challenging. So what we did instead is we took a look at the iReady data that we have available to us. What we've done, if you take a look at that top square, that's going to be at the top of each of the charts. We compared fall of 2019 data with fall of 2020 data. So it was September and October students took this in 2019, and then again in September and October of 2020. So what it does provide us is year over year data in terms of reading and math, which is ideal. It is important to always look at data clearly, transparently, cautiously. iReady is just one data point. We typically like to look at multiple data points. And so that's important to note. It's also important to note the context of it. In fall of 2019, of course, every student was taking the iReady test in the classroom in front of a teacher. And in 2020, it was a different experience for students. Time will tell how that experience has changed, how they took the test. But for now, this is the data that we have. The other important thing to note is that it is challenging, even with the SBAC, and the RASs have had this conversation many times, for us to be able to look and see how students are doing across the entire system. it continues to be so this year, looking at iReady data. When I think about, though, what's happening in each of the classrooms, in the classrooms that I've observed teachers working with kids, even though it may be challenging this year to see where the students are at the 30,000 foot view, it's been very clear from the classrooms that I've been in that the teachers know exactly where their individual students are in reading and math and are making fabulous adjustments accordingly. So the other thing to note is that this data, I tried to do a lot, perhaps too much with these slides. So what you'll notice, as always, is we have the number of students over on the left-hand side. We always like to see that in size there, and the percentages over on the right-hand side. When you just have numbers, which is for the rest of the presentation, but not for iReady, it's not a problem. But when you also add percentages, these bars are actually queued to the numbers and not the percentages. For most of the time, for large groups, that works just fine. You'll notice, and I'll point them out for a couple of groups where there's a small in size and we've changed significantly the number of kids, it looks off. So the way to look at the slide is really to make sure that you're paying attention to those percentages, because I think that for us is the most important part as we look at year over year. What we've done is we've broken it down for the green for students that are early on grade level, or they're mid, or they're above grade level. So those are green. Students who are 1 grade level below are yellow, and students who are 2 or 3 grade levels or more below are red. And so what you can see in the fall of 2019 is that when you look across the system, grades 1 through 8, 53% of our students, almost 54% of our students, were early to mid on grade level. And if you look at the next level, 29% of those students in 2019 were 1 or more. And then when you look at the red section there for 2019, almost 17% were 2 or more below grade level. And so what you like to see is the green increasing from 2019 to 2020, and the yellow and red decreasing in the percentages from 2019 to 2020. So what we've done is we've broken each of them down, both reading and math, in terms of the ethnicity and race and ethnicity. So you'll notice that in the bottom. I know you've all had an opportunity to look at these slides previously. So we'll do that thing where I awkwardly try to see if I've given you enough time to look at the slide, but not too much time to waste your valuable time here this evening. Each slide, just because the number of students that, the number of groups of students that we're representing are typically going to be 2 slides. So race and ethnicity is going to go over those 2 slides. Our Latinx students, the way to read this part of the slide is the relative placement there. An N means those students are not our Latinx students, and the Y means that those students are our Latinx students. And that's an important way to make that comparison between the two, as well as you can always look up at the top and see how all students have performed in 2019 and 2020. So we try to make those comparisons in multiple different ways. For our student programs, EL students and special education students, typically with the SBAC data, we would have 504 in there as well. I think that that is an important thing to note. iReady at this point does not call out the 504 data. I've talked to both Obi and Derek, and they're on it. So they will have a conversation with iReady. It's a national organization, and so they oftentimes, like our textbooks, do what they do throughout the nation. And so we'll continue to get after them. If not, we may figure out a way to identify that information on our own. Math, you can read the charts in similar ways. Again, all students is at the very top. Race and ethnicity is first.
So David, is it helpful for you, for me to ask questions now, or would you like me to wait towards the end? Because I know we have a lot of slides to go to. I want to be respectful of your presentation.
We do have a lot of slides, but let's go ahead and do it in the moment, and that way we won't forget.
Okay, I just have to note, this is a goal 3. Typically, we're looking at gaps for certain demographics, and this result, both in math and in ELA, shows our white students showing more red, like you said, right? We should hopefully see green growing, and we see green growing with overall and with several demographics, although not as pointed in math as ELA. But I'm just wondering what the team thought about the fact that things seem a little inverted this year.
They do in some areas, in some categories. And again, that goes back to our original question. We are eager to see what it looks like in wintertime. And certainly, I don't know that we can say that the summer slide would account for that. Certainly the changing conditions in the test may. March through June was all online, and so that's also a concern. We've had the folks from iReady come out and actually show us lots of data, both in terms of national data as well as our district data. And the argument that they made, and seemed to have the data to back it up, is that there wasn't as significant of an issue with students being online. But again, that remains to be seen, right, with the collection of additional data.
Great, thank you.
Can I also ask a quick question?
Please.
And if you're going to get to this later, please, it's fine to wait. But in perusing through all of the slides and looking for changes in those percentages between overall and specific groups of students, demographic groups, in some cases it seemed pretty clear there was some closing of the gap on the percentage of students at grade level versus those who were below grade level. In some cases, it seemed like perhaps all boats were being raised, but that the gap wasn't necessarily very different, just looking at the relative difference between percentages overall versus specific groups of students. I don't know if you have any comments or if you guys were thinking along those lines at all.
It is something that we've also observed with the, in some ways, with the SBAC data as well. That's not an uncommon pattern for everyone. If I'm understanding your question, everyone seems to improve, but the gap doesn't actually change. Everyone improves at the same relative level. If that, am I saying that right? Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question, and why would that happen? And is that a product of the test, or is that a product of the instruction being delivered? Is that a product of curriculum that's been discovered? Yeah. I don't want to be the only person talking though. If another of our panelists has an answer to that question, don't hesitate. It's a great question. They just need time to think of it. They will come up with a brilliant answer by the time we're all done here. For our Latinx students, again, math. And special programs. And again, in means that the students are not in that particular program, and the Y means that they are. One of the things that I didn't mention that we were excited to see, Derek Tucci actually had the folks from iReady come out and give us a class, a workshop on the screening tool that's going to be used for identifying the students with dyslexia. And it was a great opportunity for us to see how that will work. I know that a number of us took that information and have already engaged our principals with that. We're not ready to use it as a screener yet, but the time is fast approaching, and perhaps that's something that we will be including in future presentations as well. It is important to note that unfortunately, iReady is about math and reading. There are some notable things that are left off. Writing is not really a part of that discussion, and science as well for certain grade levels. Obi is here too, and perhaps when folks are giving part of the presentation, I certainly introduced everybody by name, but maybe they can give a little bit more information about themselves and then talk about their part of the presentation. Obi?
Good evening, Obadiah Dunham, Assistant Superintendent for the North Region in the Curriculum Instruction Assessment. And I am here tonight to just highlight some of the work around accessing algebra by 8th grade. And while that's not a specific measure in our strategic plan, we feel like it's an important number for us to continue to keep track of. And algebra is obviously a very foundational course for advanced math courses as students get on to high school, but it's also a very foundational course for many of the science courses they take at the high school. So it's one we watch very closely, and we have over the years tried to find ways to increase the access to algebra for our students, with the goal of getting all of our students into algebra in 8th grade. And we're at about, and you'll see in later slides, we're about 75% of our students take algebra or greater by 8th grade. So that's why you'll see in these slides, Dave's put in here for us Algebra 1, Algebra 2 trig, and geometry, because if they're in the last two, Algebra 2 trig or geometry, then they've accomplished that goal, which our target is. So there's work, and you can see our number from 1920 to 2021 didn't take as big of a leap. I think that's an indication to me that just in providing access, as over the years, and you can see numbers, and we've talked about over the years how we've changed algebra readiness measures to get kids in advanced level algebra, changed to some of the practices and course sequence at the middle school. You guys purchased new textbooks that have been really helpful in the recent years to help us kind of get more students into algebra. We're now needing and have begun the work of pushing the work into elementary and really thinking about what are those foundational math skills that we want to make sure we're emphasizing in the earlier grades, so that when they get up to middle school and particularly into 8th grade, they've got the most foundational math skills ready for them. So that's kind of the work to continue to kind of push on this number. I would also add that, and it's not highlighted here, so you'll have to trust me a little bit, but we have a lot more students taking Algebra 2 trig and in the middle school age, which means if you do the course study walk, it'll mean that they're timing out of the math will time out of the math that we offer at the high schools. They'll get through Calculus BC by their junior year, and they're going to be looking for a senior level math. So that's also work we're doing. We're meeting, actually, I think it's in February, with the high school principals, giving in to talk about what that senior level math can and should look like, and how do we identify teachers that are qualified to teach that math. So that's going to be the next kind of layer on the other end that's not quite in this algebra, but it's an impact, and I know many of our families are asking about just as they're looking ahead for their own children. Dave, if you want to go to the next slide. Oh, go ahead, Jackie. Okay. Your hand.
Just a quick, and tell me if this is not relevant at all, but I wonder if you also have percentages for these numbers also. What percent of, for example, the free and reduced lunch students we're looking at? I mean, the green bar of 94 looks like a terrific jump, but the percentage I think would be helpful to me, but tell me if I'm not reading the data correctly.
You are reading the data correctly. I don't believe, and I might push back to Dave here for just a second, I don't believe that on some of these we have percentages readily available, but I know it's something we could get. Dave, is that?
Yeah, we absolutely can create that and put that in a Friday brief. So if I'm understanding correctly, you're just curious to know at 94, that jump, and the 67, what's the percentage of the number of students on free and reduced lunch? So is that we've increased the
That's
number of free and reduced lunch students, or we've significantly increased the number of students taking?
right, right.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, we absolutely can.
And while you're doing that too, David, the numbers have fallen off the bars on the bottom box.
Yes. So any time that we have fewer than 10 students, we typically don't call that out. And so that's a longstanding tradition. So
Okay.
we stripped those off, and the 18 was so far over there that I just didn't put the little white box on it. So there you go. You got one number.
All right. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, Dave, thank you. So we are seeing just, this is a special education and then students with 504s in here. I mentioned just thinking about what it means at the elementary school and kind of pushing back. So I would just share with you, we have also worked with Hanover. They did some research for us. Hanover's a research company, and they pulled some things that we can begin to think about. So as we're thinking about elementary, and specifically, one of the things that are the biggest indicators of students being ready for algebra or successful in algebra is their understanding of fractions. And then even digging deeper into that is being able to compare the denominator to the numerator to estimate whether a fraction is greater or lesser than 1, dividing a fraction to find its decimal value, and converting fractions to a denominator of 100 for a percentage. So they've, through their kind of lit review for us, they're able to pull some of those. So those will be valuable things as we think about what math instruction looks like in elementary to continue to push these numbers forward. And then, as always, not surprising to us, but always just student self-efficacy in math. So their level of confidence with their math, and then their ability to problem solving and logical reasoning. So things that we can begin to think about in elementary as we push for that last, what's about 25% of our students to make sure they're in algebra by 8th grade.
Thank you, Obadiah. And as Obadiah continues through this, I want to make a connection to our conversation on the strategic plan and more specific equity indicators. And this algebra data point may be such a data point that we want to actually call out specifically, even though it's not currently called out, because it's such a gatekeeping course for further courses. And I know Obadiah has done some research on the impact in science courses able to be chosen and so forth. So thanks.
I think Dr.
So-
Hayes has a question.
Yeah, yes, I'm using my algebra skills, and the math is not working. When we look at the overall increase in students accessing algebra by the 8th grade, it's only about a 22 person increase, student increase. But when we disaggregate, all of them increase except for the one, which it's such a negligible amount. And when you add those all up, it's more than 22.
It's actually this slide right here, maybe.
No, I was going backwards.
Yeah, we'll go back, David. I think what we'll just have to go in and check the numbers again. But if you look at the 1290, so go back one more slide.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. So that one,
1290 to 1312, I think is where the math is coming from.
yes. So that's a 20, if I'm doing the math right, that's 22. And then if you just look down, free and reduced lunch is close to 30. There is a small drop in the EL, but it's not going to compensate. And then on the next slide, each subgroup increases by a substantial amount.
So part of the challenge is that each group could be, there's students
Double.
from each group
Right.
in
Got
each
it.
other's groups.
Got it.
So
Yep.
that may be the discrepancy.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. This slide is just breaking it down. This is just the demographic breakdown with some of our demographic groups and just what what the changes would look like. And again, we're seeing, it's nice to see some increase in some of our subgroups, but there's still, I think we always come back to, there's still some work to do in these areas as well.
So can I ask, what kind of strategies are used in order to try and affect that outcome?
So I think there's a couple things. One that, I assume, Director Cast, you're talking about the demographic.
Or even inclusion with the special ed students. Like, are there any specific strategies you guys have been employing to try to work on that?
So I would say with the special education, EL services, those types of services, you hit on it right away when you said inclusion. How do we make sure these students are getting access to the core content areas as opposed to being pulled out for their instruction? And that's the biggest one. If we can just get them in the room with all the other students, then their ability to access the content there is I think our number one strategy. Building out of that, you're going to hear, I think, Michael and Melissa talk later about MTSS. So thinking about, we're giving them all access to the core, and I don't want to steal their thunder, but giving them all access to the core instruction, and then making sure they have interventions that are specifically targeted to where their deficits might be or where their supports are needed, and really being thoughtful about how we put that connection together. And that can be true for students receiving special services or students identifying as Hispanic or Black African American or any other subgroup that fits in there.
Great, thank you.
Okay, yep.
Hey, Obi, can you go back to the last slide for a second?
Dave, thank you. We missed a slide, didn't we? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, here's another example of it, which would be great to see the percentages, because some of these changes from 15 to 20 that could be accounted for just by enrollment increase, because they're just not very large numbers, right? So we need to differentiate that. Is it just a factor of more kids in that sector in the school, or is it a percentage, and is there a improvement really?
Yeah, I'll be happy to get you that information.
All right, thank you.
It'll be easy to do. You bet.
All right, and Dave, you want to go to the next slide? So here's just, go back one, thank you. Here's, you can see in the chart, the projections are just taking average growth and dividing it over years and just kind of seeing where we're going. But you can see since 2016-17, where we had about 48% of our students, 48.5% of our students in accessing algebra at 8th grade, and where we've grown in just a few years to where we're close to 75%, with that focus of being really pushing towards 100%. So still an upward slope on the graph, if you will. And then I think this is a neat slide to look at as well. And one of the things I point out to you is that 6th grade group, and look at how the growth has been in 6th graders accessing algebra. And so when I talked about the growth needed in Algebra 2 Trig earlier on in 8th grade and what that means for them in that senior level math course, with our highly capable services and just how we've changed that model and provided greater access, we're seeing so many more 6th graders who now are getting access to algebra that wouldn't have. And with that shift to middle school, obviously the delivery models made it easier as well. And then this year, I know that Amity Butler, who's our Director of Accelerated Models and Services, has found ways to think creatively in this environment of how do they get, for our singly qualified math students, how do we make sure they're getting the exact same instruction that our EAP students would be getting in an EAP classroom. So I anticipate that number even being a little higher for 6th grade this next year as we think about kids ready for algebra in 6th grade.
All right, the next slide is Heather.
Good evening, Heather Miller, Assistant Superintendent for the South Region. And tonight I'm going to share with you a little bit about the world language competency testing. where we've come over the last 3.5 years.
Heather,
So-
Heather, could you speak up a little? You sound like you're coming from a long way away. We can hardly hear you.
Michelle,
Keep a little bit more.
a little bit more. Hold on. Let me check my volume.
Oh, you're getting better.
How's this?
You might have
Can you hear
your,
me now?
is your mic covered up or something? Maybe your mic is covered up somehow.
Me now?
There you go. Much better.
Better?
Yes.
Thank you for mentioning that, Dr. Reed. I appreciate that. I'd hate to go through a whole presentation and no one could hear it.
Well, we would too. We want to hear you.
All right. Let me get back here. So, as mentioned, Heather Miller, Assistant Superintendent for the South Region, and I'm going to speak to the World Language Competency Testing numbers and the data that we have accumulated over the last 3.5 years. We did our first testing in April of 2017, and our last testing we did for World Language Competency was end of February in 2020, right before we entered the pandemic phase. So the chart on the left-hand side, where it talks about the seal of biliteracy, is the number of students that are represented there, and I'll use my example in Spanish, is that the 143 students that have qualified to earn the seal of biliteracy by earning 4 credits of the language. So all of those languages on the left-hand side, and then you can see the number of students that have achieved 4 credits of the world language. Now I want to also, as you remember, that that's not the only thing they have to do to obtain the seal of biliteracy. They also need to pass 4 credits of English language arts, and they need to meet their graduation pathway requirement. So the portion that you're looking at states the number of students that have qualified under the world language requirement of 4 credits. The graph in the middle just is a breakdown of the percentage of tests taken for those students who have achieved 4 credits, earned 4 credits. So you can see the number by language, the percentage of what that is. So Spanish, out of 43.58% students have earned 4 credits in Spanish. So that's just the percentage breakdown. The graph on the right is the total tests that we have administered since the inception of this program in 2017, and it's broken down by region. So you're able to see the top languages in each region and the number of tests that were administered in each of those languages, and then the number of credits that students earned. And remember that students can earn anywhere from 1 to 4 credits, depending on their score on the exam. Any questions on that slide?
I have one. You mentioned, first of all, lovely. I'm so thrilled that we're able to do this for our students, and this is great work. You mentioned the last time we were able to do this was last February, and I know the hiccup is that they have not, the state has not been able to get these tests online, or they hadn't as of last fall. Where is that at? Are our students going to be able to access this year? And do you need us board members poking someone to move that along?
I'm so glad you asked that, Director Hayes. So we have good news to share. We are very close to being able to send out a registration form for our seniors. And we recognize that we do have seniors who are counting on taking this test for either a graduation requirement or for college entrance, or to earn the seal of biliteracy. So we have worked with the testing agencies, and we have 2 options available. We can do an in-person option in small groups, which we are planning for at the end of March. Also always taking into account health and safety. And at that time, we will be able to bring groups into small groups of 2 or 3 in a classroom to take the test. And then also we will offer an online option for students who are unable to come to the schoolhouse at that time at the end of March. So we can proctor either on-site or remotely. So we will be sending out a registration form in the next 2 weeks. We are focusing on our seniors because those are the students that we need to make sure we get through for those 3 reasons I mentioned.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you, Heather. So the next series of slides is going to be, and again, up at the top, you can see the particular measure that it is that we're trying to, well, measure with the data that we're presenting. Increased enrollment and completion rates for traditionally underrepresented student groups in advanced courses and specialized programs. These are taken from all the AP, IB, and college and the high school classes. We are looking at several years back, so the slides now are multiple slides. So race and ethnicity is going to be 2 slides. You can see the number of students. Each of those.
Can I ask a question? I just was looking at the low income numbers. And so how much is financial cost a barrier for students, do you think?
That's a great question. Heather, you'd probably be the best person to talk to that.
Yes, I think that I believe our counselors and administrators do a very good job of making sure that students and families know that there are funds available and we have assistance for them if they are unable to afford the test for AP or IB. I'm not going to say we do it 100% because I know that's not the case, but we do have many programs that can help support the students. Our foundation, I know that the IB Booster Club does a lot of work with helping to support students and their fees. Also, the state gives us grant money. We receive grant money from the state to be able to pay for those test fees. So we have a lot of options, and we are trying to be very intentional about making sure that's in the course description books this year so that it will clearly state that financial assistance is available, so that doesn't deter a student from signing up for the course. But as with anything, that I'm sure that we don't get everybody, and I'm sure that there's more we could be doing.
Yeah, thank you. It's yeah, it's, you know, that would be a great area to brainstorm and see what we might be able to come up with, because it's definitely not representative of the percentage of our population in there. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if that drop is pandemic related and that students that are having to work to support households don't feel that they have time to do the coursework maybe required by a more advanced class.
That's a very good point.
I guess I'd like to make a comment too. I was pleased to see that in general, these numbers have increased this year, even with remote learning. I thought that perhaps students may feel like this year there'd be some more unknowables and maybe they would not take some of these classes this year. So it's nice to see that they made those choices.
Sorry, I was muted there. The other group of courses that we look at are CTE dual credit offerings. Students get both, obviously, credit for us, CTE, but also at a particular college or university, typically a community college as well. So they get dual credits. And this is by, again, beginning with race and ethnicity. And then looking at programs, and down at the bottom by gender.
You know, Director Hayes, your point about the impact of pandemics on low-income families, you know, we see it here too. But just if we want to guesstimate, that's maybe the reason.
So I'm wondering what we can do, given that students are going to be registering in a very short, about 6 weeks for next year, how to have that conversation and that targeting of those students to make sure that they're not missing out on these needed classes, given that staff can't know who they are. So how do we do that work?
Dave, do you mind if I comment on that?
No, please.
I would just share that we have spent 3 kind of extensive meetings analyzing not this specific data set, but the problem you guys are talking about with our high school counselors and principals, high school administrative teams and principals, and counselors, and they've been developing strategies to do just what you're describing. Like they're looking at patterns, course taking patterns. They did a real deep dive into the class of 2020 and all the way back to 9th grade is really where there was a high school look of what classes and what course taking patterns and who wasn't accessing the most rigorous courses and where that was, and then thinking about just what you're describing. So what can we do now? Now we know this information about the class of 2020. The classes that are in our high school right now aren't much different. And so how do we really look and target? So they were very thoughtful conversations. I know I was in conversation, there was an extensive conversation about students living in low income. I heard in debriefs, our Latinx students, Black African-American students. So they're really thinking and thoughtfully trying to think about how they can target those students in making sure, and really the focus was on leaving college ready. And so they're really looking at how to do that. And I know that you guys had the opportunity to meet with Stephen Gehring last year. And so he helped facilitate that work, and it was kind of a much more in-depth kind of look at that. So I'm hopeful that's going to help as well.
Great.
Thanks for that detail. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
So in terms of our increasing access to social emotional supports, some of these things were on the list last year as well. I've put them back on the list this year because I talked to the Razes and say, can we say with confidence that these things are still happening in the middle of a pandemic, right? And everybody's doing online learning, and we can. And so I think that they are worth calling out. PBIS and cell work continues. It certainly is different. It looks different. It's focused far more on the classroom rather than school, but it is still occurring. Second step is still being taught. Students are still meeting with their counselors. This is something that I know Heather worked hard with counselors early on a few years ago to make sure that students had those opportunities in every high school. This was the year, last year we said we were looking forward to this year. This year is the year that a third full-time counselor is in every middle school with a ratio of 1 to 365, and in high school, 1 to 325. And then Rick Farrell has been doing tremendous work getting supports and services through grants, working with King County, PSCSD, and a number of other organizations to get mental health services available in every high school, mental health services in every middle school, mental health therapist available 1 day a week in each of our Title I schools. And then, of course, we've been working to get school counselors in all of our elementary schools, half-time or full-time. And then this year in particular, we've been working with the University of Washington and the Forefront Suicide Prevention Grant Program. They have met with every high school. Woodinville High School has already participated in this. They're now meeting with the other 3 high schools. I believe SAS is also participating as well. Schools are developing a suicide prevention protocol with this organization. The organization has been training teachers, a core group of teachers, counselors, and psychologists, as well as doing outreach to the community, working with parents and working with students as well. And so there continues to be this important push for the social emotional supports and services. And as we know, in the middle of this pandemic, when students are increasingly isolated and away from each other, that it is now and as we move forward, more important than ever. So Michael Tolley is going to talk to us about the next few slides, looking ahead, talking about how it is that we're doing this, the nuts and bolts of how this is coming off the page. Michael, I said a couple of terms, RTI and MTSS, and if you would make sure that you help us know what those terms are, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, not a problem. So Michael Tolley, Assistant Superintendent for the East Region. So as Dave was, well, what this slide is indicating, of course, is we've established a coherent through line from the central office and instructional leaders through to our students and the teachers within the classroom. So this graphic just tries to illustrate what some of those structures and components are in order for that to happen. Of course, it begins on the left-hand side with the work of the school board, along with the superintendent and the community, to establish what's a vision for the districts and the policies to support that captured within the strategic plan. We then take and implement the strategies within the plan to address for in this case, the goals that we have established for our school district. Those then work its way through our system as you can see, with the structures and systems of things like the multi-tiered systems of support, the whole child framework. And then at the building level, we have strategic action plans that actually all schools develop, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then ultimately that goes into the classroom and where we find supports not only in PLCs, which are professional learning communities, but grade level teams and things like that. So all of that is to, of course, work to our ultimate goal is to have a success for each and every one of our students. So the structure allows for that, and that builds the coherence within our system. But we would like to talk a little bit more about what is the strategic action plans within the buildings, as well as the multi-tiered systems of support. So, Dave, so with the strategic action plans at the building level, it's truly an inquiry process where we're looking at data and the academic and social emotional needs of our students. We use that to inform a theory of action that then informs what are the various instructional practices and strategies we must use to better meet the needs of each and every one of our students. So we've been doing this data now, we've shared a lot of data, but at the building level, that work is ongoing, as well as you can see, and we'll talk a little bit more about the multi-tiered systems of support that you see there within that structure. So you've seen this slide before. This is the MTSS Whole Child Framework implementation, what we call a waterfall slide. And the purpose of this slide is to basically say that we've been building this system out over several years, and we continue to work on that. As you're well aware, the PBIS, which is the Positive Behavioral Intervention Support System. We've been implementing that for a period of time. We've recently added also an emphasis on RTI, which is the response to intervention, which is what some people would say the academic component of MTSS. So what you see along the left-hand column there are the components of not just the PBIS, that's the top line row there, but the other components of response to intervention within its fidelity of implementation rubric that we're using to ensure that we're building that system out. That's what that list is. And as you can see, as currently in the 2021 school year, we're continuing to build out those structures. In a minute, we're going to have Melissa Riley talk a little bit more about what that might look like. But ultimately, what we're wanting to do is take this to scale over time. Our focus this year is around building out all of the structures necessary to support the multi-tiered system of support whole child framework. Next year will be more of a focus on the systems that go along with that. But over the next 3 years, we should be able to have this fully implemented and taken to scale. So with that, I'd like to invite Melissa Riley to speak to a little bit more detail about the MTSS structures and some of the work we're doing to move this initiative forward.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Wanted to make sure that wasn't my microphone. As Michael mentioned, most of you know me, Melissa Riley. And as in this new role as the Assistant Director of Equity Pedagogy, I've been afforded the opportunity to engage in processes and practices that bring about more equitable opportunities and outcomes for students. And MTSS is certainly one of those. Last week, there was a board report that you received that went into a bit more detail about the work that we're doing. And I just want to highlight a few things here. I first want to start with just a reminder that in North Shore, as you know, you are driven to eliminate barriers that perpetuate injustice and create equitable and inclusive processes that ensure that each and every student has access to rigorous core instruction, which is a huge component of this MTSS work. And also ensuring that along with that at Tier 1, there's appropriate scaffolds to support each of our students. And so an equity-focused MTSS, as Michael is referring to, or multi-tiered systems of support, really creates a personalized systemic approach for each and every student. And so I just wanted to touch on a few things in connection to the report that was mentioned in the work that Michael just highlighted. I think as I began working with other North Shore colleagues on implementing the Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervention Services Plan, or the CCIS plan, it became really clear that our work has a longevity beyond the grant this year in really making connections with ensuring that North Shore can become a multi-tiered system of support as an entire institution. And so as mentioned, this work started a few years ago, and we are just continuing to build on it. And since then, not only have schools engaged in learning around the foundations of MTSS, from the different tiers of support to focusing on meeting the academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of students. But then as a district, we've also launched work that has focused on culturally responsive, high leverage, and inclusive practices. And those are embedded in the strategic action plans to keep our work really focused and intentional. And so the work continues, we believe, with the aim to move beyond just surface level or more shallow level understanding, to really deeply understand the performative nature of the equity work that needs to happen in each and every school for us to model our actions alongside of the words that are on the page. And so there's a few ways, if you can go to the next slide, that I highlighted as Michael talks about. For whatever reason, this particular image makes me think of if you were to take a slice out of the organization and look at it under a microscopic lens, you would want to see this type of coherence occurring within our at the district level, but in each and every school and on each and every team. And so while we're working hard, we're continuing to work better together across departments, I believe, at this point towards coherence, persevering to lead and then learn about the various components of MTSS and how it facilitates our vision around equity. We're really focused right now on clear messaging so that everybody in the system has common understanding, because we know that will yield common practice. We also believe that the creation of a clear board policy will help us in delineating the team structures and processes across the system in a really clear way that will better help us ensure that there's certain access for each and every student based on their needs. And that's not just students who are striving to achieve grade level expectations, but also for those students that excel. Additionally, with the implementation of MTSS with fidelity, it means that we want to continue to provide the types of professional development and job embedded support that teachers need to be effective practitioners. And so that's highlighted in where we mention addressing tier 1. And in addition, if I were to make a connection back to what Obi had shared, he shared some research from Hanover around mathematics in elementary. And so when we think about tier 1 fidelity and we think about the targeted objectives that we have around making sure that mathematicians are ready to move into middle school with the right types of educational experiences that ensure that they're ready, MTSS is a place where we can look at that in a really strategic manner to make sure that there's strategies in place at tier 1 that really help support that vision. Ultimately, we believe that we'll be closer to achieving educational equity in North Shore when all of our work is aligned and it brings about this type of coherence. And for MTSS, that means that we'll have a comprehensive continuum of evidence-based systemic practices that will support our rapid response to student needs to help accelerate their learning, but through the provision of access and opportunity, right, that will then produce the type of equitable outcomes we're looking for. MTSS in and of itself is a self-repeating, self-correcting, ongoing method for assuring that there's effective decision making at a systems level, but that really centers students in the work that we aim to do in access and in outcome. So I know we're past time, but I want to make sure there's time for questions, and so I'll pause there and let Dave continue and then take any specific questions after.
Melissa, I just want to clarify from the previous chart, are all the schools now doing MTSS work?
So I believe every school is engaged in MTSS work in some fashion. I believe you could ask any principal about the types of work they've been doing over the past few years to support a tier 1 fidelity and ensuring that their systems of support for students. What we want to do is become more cohesive as a district in the direction that we're going, and so that when if a student were to be referred to a guidance team at one particular elementary to the middle school that's in their pathway, that there would be some commonality in our processes and in our experiences, as well as across the regions that we serve as well.
Thank you.
Chris, I know this was a slide that you shared with us last year, but I think it is even more relevant this year.
Yeah, and I know we're over time, so I'll try to go through this very quickly. As David mentioned, all of our work, the through line is equity and educational justice, especially for students of color and those from low-income families. Adverse experiences like poverty, structural racism, and chronic stress, can also act as a barrier to success as well. To me, Goal 3 seeks to help educators, not only look at the whole child specifically, but also transform the system from within to help traditional marginalized populations to reach equitable outcomes, and be in a position to have the same access and opportunity as other students. If you look at the slide there, the goal is to support the whole child approach through educational justice lens, as Dave talked about in the very beginning. 7 boxes there with arrows, pointing towards and embracing the whole child. Each box provides a program or system that individualized culturally responsive framework, integrating student services and supports and learning. It is important to understand that these systems, cannot work effectively as a standalone. And we talked about that last year, how the systems, they weren't talking to one another. You have an equity committee, you have a PBS committee, and they're not communicating. So we're doing a better job of that this year, but they have to be talking in order to work. When working together with an equity lens, they all serve as pillars to embrace the whole child in education. If you look at our system education, it has historically dealt with behaviors, and I'm talking about really PBIS and PBIS, those systems here right now, because that's what those are function. That's the I guess the component of those two systems is to work on students' behavior. But historically, with behavior problems of students, and I'm old enough to remember when they used to have paddlings. I'm not saying that I ever experienced one of those, but I do remember those. Also at a time when you would write, hundreds of times on the board, whatever related to your behavior that day was. Those systems didn't work. So the whole point of looking at PBIS and MTS and those work is to find systems that work, to help kids change their behavior. So the point is that there's always been consequences for negative behavior, but consequences has always ignored, the systematic oppressions and biased practices, which has often led to punitive discipline practices for students of color of various subgroups. So our data, as you've seen tonight, it continues to show that students of color are still struggling in our system. So looking through Goal 3 with an equity lens, some of the systems that have already been discussed by Melissa and Michael was MTS and PBIS and SAL are to support students, especially our subgroups. And as you see in the chart there, and like all systems, they are developed to address certain groups. But what I've learned is that when you create systems to support or help one group, it benefits everyone. And I look at this as the analogy I always look at is the wheelchair ramp, in malls. How many of you have gone into the mall and instead of using the stairs, which is right beside the ramp, you use the wheelchair ramp. And I know myself, as I get older and my knees, I'm going to use the ramp. So my point is systems that benefit one group, created to benefit one group, has always benefited others as well, benefit everyone as a whole. And so for the sake of time here, I'm just going to skip right through some of this. And just talk about the last part of the point of David's presentation is all of these pillars and boxes, can promote high quality instruction and practices, education opportunities and outcomes for all students, irrespective of race, socioeconomic status or gender, sexual orientation, and other differences. What I like about Goal 3 is that the purpose of it is to promote growth for students, for every student, elimination of outcomes and opportunity gaps. While it's important to understand, none of these, along with solve longstanding and deep-seated inequities in the education system, but working together, it can help schools promote understanding, examine biases, reflect on and address the impact of racism, and cultivate practices that close opportunity gaps and create a more inclusive school community and educational system grounded in educational justice.
Thank you, Chris. I apologize if I interrupted you in the middle. My ear pod clicked off and I thought you just muted yourself, so I was trying to help out. Thank you, Chris.
No problem.
We are at time. I want to be really mindful that you have another meeting coming up. We are welcome to stay here and answer all the questions that you have, but I suspect you probably want to get something to eat. And so I will turn it back to you to decide how you want to use the rest of the time. But thank you for letting us be here tonight to share with you. Thank you for giving us your evening and all you've done for us always.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for the great presentation and information. Any questions from board members?
President Swain, maybe I could just say a thank you and how nice it was to see such improvement in the 8th grade math trajectory, and even going down to 6th grade. And the fact that we may be adding more math at the senior level, I think is a really exciting outcome of the focus of this work. So thank you.
I have a question. There's a measure that wasn't listed in the presentation, but around discipline rates that's actually listed in the strategic plan. And I know things being remote now, it's different, but I wanted to make sure we covered that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been significantly different. Obviously, with students not being in school, that the data looks remarkably different. As we think about all the things that the pandemic has impacted, certainly having teachers being able to focus on engagement and focus on the other things that we've talked about certainly is pretty critical.
So in what ways would the data be different this year?
I think that we've got significantly less discipline. Certainly we typically talk about suspensions, expulsion, those kind of things, and the disproportionality. I don't know that we've had any of those things. Heather, it looks like you were going to say something.
Well, I would agree with what you said, Dave. I think the data is substantially different, and we would need to think about the relevance of the comparative data. We certainly would have maybe some data incidents recorded, but as I was speaking to an administrative team today at one of our middle schools, they have registered 0 suspensions, 0. We don't have Saturday school. We don't have after school detention, and everything that they are doing for behavior modification or the PBIS strategies, they're really doing through conferencing with the teacher and the parent and the administrator, which is really resulting in some good outcomes and some restorative work. If they need to get 2 kids together to do a restorative conference, they're coordinating those. But the data would be very different from what we've seen in the past. We certainly could pull something together around what we are doing in a remote pandemic environment.
And that, yeah, see, that is really interesting. So as you know, if there's been some chats about some resets that the pandemic is causing us to have, and this has taken away the tradition of Saturday school and the like, perhaps this is a really nice learning. So I'd really welcome learning more about that. That would be great. And I'm trying to be mindful of the time. I do have a couple more questions, but I think we can talk about it during the business meeting. So I'll just raise it when we have that agenda item. That'll be really handy. So thank you all for the work. And it's really nice to have this conversation right at the semester point of the year, because it's so important to have these conversations and to see this data. And it's surprising, I think some people were worried, and it's not a perfect, right? It's an honest report. There's obviously some things that we could continue to talk about, but I think it's really energizing to see how the structures are really impacting what we're able to do this year. So thank you.
Anyone else before we adjourn?
So I have one, and I'm going to bungle this. Siobhan, can you get us all back onto the screen so that I can rely on, if the eyebrows start going up as I'm going down this road of, stop, then I'll shut up. But when I was looking at the world competency, the languages that we're testing and okay, I liked it better when we were all on the screen together. However, we get back to that. There we go. Using that as perhaps an idea of the percentages of students that speak those languages at home that are EL students. So the largest percentage of tests that were taken were Spanish. Largest percentage of our EL students would be Spanish speaking students, just roughly. The second largest number of tests that were administered was Russian, which is not surprising. We know that in Snohomish County, that is a big language spoken there and families are from. All of the rest of the languages that warranted a color of the pie are languages spoken by people that also fall into another subgroup, so that we're to that discussion about opportunity gaps and how to close those and the work that we need to do. They're kind of, if you're an EL student speaking one of those languages, you also fall into another subgroup. So we're monitoring and can look to see. But if by and large, and again, this is where I'm looking for eyebrows, I'm assuming that if you speak Russian, you're probably white, which means that you're falling into that very large group and could potentially get lost. So I guess I'm wondering are we spending any time kind of diving into that EL subgroup that speak Russian to see if there is a systemic issue there that is negatively impacting those students that we should be monitoring?
Thank you, Director Hayes.
If that made any sense, and if I'm way out of line, let me know.
Thank you, Director Hayes. I think what you're seeing are people taking notes, and we're going to take a look at the data and get back to you via the Friday brief.
Okay, thank you.
I could just quickly first thank Director Cast for asking my one big question about the one bullet point from Goal 3 that wasn't specifically addressed. So I would look forward to seeing how you've been approaching disciplinary data. And honestly, I would have been really surprised if it was nearly impossible. It wasn't nearly impossible to collect that kind of information given the conditions that we're operating under right now. But that'll be really useful. And other than that, just to thank you all for a very detailed presentation. There's a lot of great information, and looking forward to some of the follow-up information from you. So thanks.
Dr. Reed, do you have any final comments?
No, just thank the team and appreciate all the hard work and the coordination and the integration of such key topics in our work. So just appreciate all the work and the continued work. So thank you, President Swain.
Great. Well, thank you all, everyone. We'll call this meeting adjourned. We'll see you in roughly 8 minutes for the board meeting.